Testing. 1, 2, 3. It's your gal, Juliberry. Hello, everyone. Are we ready? You ready?
Hello, King.
Hello, King.
I am so ready. I don't know what's going on with my mic. It's being funky.
I'm putting on the lore playlist. I'm gonna make everyone sad. I'm gonna make everyone sad now.
No.
Yeah. Shall we do what they call a lore recap?
A lore recap? My oh my. Are you gonna spoil us today with a lore recap?
I mean, I just freaking might. Yeah, so Tommy, Wilbur, and Technoblade are off and about on their little journey to go see the lights. They went through this little, like, forest area, and it was really cute. And then, they have to go down into the mine shafts, and then Tommy becomes Ellie from The Last of Us, and they have to drag him across a board over the river, or across the river, and it's great. And then, Schlatt is being emo, as per usual.
As usual.
And, Phil is mad that he can't go after all the kids. Oh, Rambu disappears.
Rambu does disappear and goes after Tubbo.
He goes after Tubbo. Yes, Emmy. What's going on, King? Yes, it did hit 100K. I saw 100K hits.
Dang. G to the frickin' G.
Okay, what else happened? Bum 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 bum.
Let's see. So they did pull. I think Techno actually got separated from Will and Tommy. And they got stuck in, like, a little, like, area.
Oh, that's right. Tommy did actually start glowing.
Yeah, he did. He became a glow stick in front of Wilbur.
He's a glow stick boy. Glow stick boy is back. Yeah. Is that it?
I think so.
Guys, if you want more recap stuff, go back and watch the videos at
This is how bad we are doing.
This is how bad. This is how off our game we are. Shall we get into it, yeah?
I am prepared.
I know it's been a while, but Chapter 16. It's almost over. It's just begun. Trigger warnings for violence and multiple character injuries. So, if you need to step away, take care of yourself. You're okay. I have to pretend to be a British bald guy now.
Okay, easy enough.
Easier said than done. Let's be real. No one can compare to the Jack Manifold.
Except for Jack Manifold.
True. Bitches get bonked around this chapter. Whoa.
Oh.
Okay. Anyways. He did what? Jack sputtered, leaning his hands against the countertop that had been dusted with flour for something his sister was baking. Bacon? Baking.
What's shaking bacon?
What's shaking bacon? For something his sister was baking. It wasn't him, per se. It was the other one, Sam explained, a bit confused on how to word Rambu's ender walk correctly. But Rambu had the ender prince under control. He hasn't hurt anyone in nearly 2 years. And even then it was only one man. One of the men who'd hurt him when he was little. Nikki shook her head, refusing to even consider the possibility that her younger brother had landed 5 innocent guards in the infirmary. Even if their injuries were minor. And where is Rambu? Has he switched back? You didn't throw him in a cell, did you? This isn't his fault. My lady, we do strange things for people we care for. But no, we have not found him yet. He escaped through the main gates. None of our horses are fast enough to catch Prince Technoblades. Though how he was able to tame the stallion is beyond me, Sam replied, his suit of armor glinting in the deep, dull magenta of netherite.
Nikki hissed. You'll find that my brother is stronger than he looks. I'd never doubt the End Prince's values, Nikki. I know exactly how strong Rambu is, Sam said. Jack straightened up, suddenly nervous. You said Tubbo went missing, right? The creeper nodded at him, and Jack's heart sank. He muttered, Stupid kid. He went after Tubbo.
Rambu could defend himself, yes, but it was so incredibly easy to recognize the kid. He was 6'6", and his horns gave him an extra half a foot. He was a walking target. He was going to get himself killed and Tubbo along with him. Why wasn't I summoned? Why the hell am I not out there right now with the rest of the guard? Sam shook his head and fiddled with the mask on his face. Jack, this is a personal matter for you. I can't allow you to.
Like hell you can't. That's my little brother. I'm going with you unless you want to try and stop me. He knew damn well that Sam could easily stop him, but he also knew the man didn't have the will to deny him something like this. Sam sighed and turned away, contemplating what to do for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. You can't step out of line, Jack. If we do find them, you can't let your heart dictate your actions. You need to think. Otherwise, you will get yourself and your brother killed. Mm-hmm. Something flickered in the warden's expression for a moment, and then Sam grinned. It's a dangerous world out there, and Ranboo is a noble, a prince of a lost world. His wings alone could cost a fortune. His head could be worth enough to pay for a castle fit for a king. His long hair perhaps distributed out to the highest buyers. The Ender Prince has his enemies, that's for sure. None of them earned. Ranboo is a kind soul, but poachers don't give a damn. All they see is the last dragon and his wings hanging above some rich man's fireplace.
Jack seethed the words of the warden, but he did not heed to the clear taunt. Sam was testing him. He wanted to see if he would break, if he would swing. It was a test of resilience. Sam stared at him for a long moment. His eyes conflicted, and then he clapped the man's shoulders. We'll bring your brother home together, then. The green-haired man turned to the pink-haired baker, who had her head in her hands. Nikki, are you okay? Everyone is gone. Wilbur and Techno are missing, and now Tubbo and Ranboo. And you're leaving too, Jack.
Jack's eyes softened, and he wrapped an arm around his sister's shoulder and said, I'll bring him home for you to properly ground forever, okay? He's a smart kid, despite what I said earlier. You know how much he cares for Tubbo. He'd protect him to the ends of the earth. Don't stay by yourself, Nick. Go spend time with Quackity and Charlie. I'm sure he misses Wilbur just as much as you do. I'm sure he misses him a lot more than me. You know how they are, Nikki said with a laugh. She knew how the two looked at each other. She had half a mind to wring Wilbur by the ear for his obliviousness. True, Jack laughed and pulled Nikki into a brief hug. Nikki wrapped her arms tight around her brother, and she spoke softly. When you find him, tell him he's in so much trouble for worrying his sister to death. Tell him that he's on laundry duty for a month. Tell him... Nikki trailed off with tears in her eyes. Tell him to come home so I can give him a proper scolding, and tell him his sister misses him.
No. Jack nodded and hugged her a bit tighter before letting go. Will do. I wish you would come with me to get Ranboo back. You've one hell of a swing. But there are already enough people away from the palace. Someone has to protect the Emperor while we're away. I'm pretty sure the Emperor can defend himself just fine. Nikki laughed and Jack nodded. Probably. But still. Out of the three of us, you're the force to be reckoned with. Nikki smiled.
What the fuck? What the fuck? What the absolute shit fucking hell? Wilbur stared at the boy in shock for a long moment while Tommy simply rolled his eyes, a pale golden light reflecting off of his face.
It wasn't just that his hands were glowing. He could see the kid's bones, or at least the ones on his hands as the glow faded to his elbows. Faded. Ah! Oh my gosh. Okay. Tommy looked down and did his best to swim to the ground with Wilbur following quickly after. There was no time to be dumbfounded by the impossible. They had to survive first. With the light Tommy provided from his glowing bones, what else was he supposed to call them? They began digging at the piles of stone at the bottom of the floor as fast as they could while air already started to become scarce in their lungs.
What? Will they have enough time? No, fuck the gods. Mom, we need more time. Please help us. I'm not ready to die yet.
It had been a long time since Wilbur had called upon his mother's blessing for anything, but the hour of his death seemed as good as a time as any. He looked at Tommy, whose effort at pulling away the stones was still as fierce as his own. He was determined. His eyes were growing cloudy and his movements were becoming uncoordinated, but he could still see a strength that he was losing with each passing moment as his lungs burned. He was determined to live. And then...
Wilbur pulled against a specific stone, and all of a sudden the rocks collapsed in upon themselves, sending both him and Tommy tumbling out of the mine shaft. Stray rocks beat against them with a flood of water as the two hit the swiftly moving river. Wilbur tried to grab at Tommy's wrists as they fell. Tommy attempted to weakly grasp at his hand, but the current was too quick and his fingers slipped, losing the boy in the water. His head swam from the lack of oxygen, and he pushed himself to the surface until his head broke through the crashing waves. He briefly saw a flash of blurry pink, but as soon as he caught his breath, he was back beneath the river, searching for a fading glow and the gleam of golden blonde hair. One thought echoed through his mind that Wilbur wished desperately didn't matter to him. He didn't know this kid. He shouldn't care this much for him.
But the thought echoed all the same. He can't swim. Save him. Wilbur's head broke through the surface again, and he screamed, utterly terrified against his best wishes. He's not resurfacing! Help me! He didn't turn. He simply hoped that the flash of pink he'd seen had been his twin.
Will paddled against the stream. His eyes opened wide in the murky water as he searched for the boy. At some point, he saw his twin catch up to him at his side, and the hope that they'd come across the boy skyrocketed. As they swam further down the stream, a flash of gold and blue caught his eye. He tapped his brother as they swam side by side, pointing to it. Some fabric suddenly hit him as he swam further down the stream, and Wilbur scrambled to grab it. He looked down beneath the waves and saw Tommy's red scarf clenched tightly in his fist. By then, Techno had shot forward with a speed Wilbur would have never been able to match, spotting the kid in the water. He wasn't moving.
Finally, he saw Techno surface, and he broke through the icy water with him. He swayed from the lack of oxygen as his vision focused with water-stained glasses at the sight of his brother carrying a limp and lifeless Tommy in his arms. His face was pale and had a blue hue to it. His arms hung uselessly in Techno's grasp. His straw-blonde hair fell over his eyes. Wilbur's grip on the scarf tightened. It had been 4 minutes since the moment he and Tommy had fallen from the mine shaft. He had not seen Tommy resurface once.
He felt something tight swell in his throat. I don't know him. He means nothing. If he dies, what should I care? You told him about Theseus. You let down your walls. You protected him. He's a child and a kind one at that. A spitfire of wit and perseverance. He's a good kid, and I'd be sad if he died today. He meant something. Less than an enemy, but not quite a friend. A accomplice or an acquaintance, and a young one at that. Whether Wilbur wanted to admit it or not, he liked the kid, and he didn't want to see him dead.
He was so young as Theseus might have been today if he'd survived. He'd be damned if he let the kid fall to a watery grave. It's flashback time. Prepare yourself.
Aww.
The sounds of screams are what woke him that night. He jolted upright in his chair, nearly sending his son tumbling off of him from where the boy had been sleeping on his chest. Schlatt quickly caught Tubbo and scooped him into his arms as the screams from outside the room continued.
He eyed Phil's desk and looked down at his son, who was whimpering with fear. He set the boy on the ground and smoothed out his tousled hair as he spoke. Go get under Phil's desk, Tubbo, and whatever you do, don't move from that spot until I come to get you. No matter what you hear, do not move from that spot. But, Tubbo began, but Schlatt cut him off. No buts. Stay under the table and don't leave until I come to get you, okay? Tubbo's eyes filled with tears. Dad, I'm scared.
Schlatt felt a part of his heart shatter at his son's frightened voice. He hugged the boy as tightly as he could. It's gonna be alright, buddy. I won't let anyone hurt you, but you need to hide, alright? Tubbo nodded, and Schlatt pressed a kiss on the top of his head. I love you, kiddo. I love you too, Dad. With that, the 5-year-old crawled underneath Phil's desk and out of sight. Schlatt let out a sigh of relief and quickly ran out of the room to the sound of Wilbur and Theseus screaming.
The moment he entered the hallway and looked at the prince's rooms, he felt his blood run cold at what he saw. The Emperor was lying just outside the door in a pool of his own blood. Phil! Schlatt cried and rushed over to his best friend. Before he could even kneel by the Emperor's side, he looked up to the twins' open door and froze as he saw a masked man looking back at him from the balcony. Oh, fuck. The ram paled.
He broke into a run as soon as he saw what the man was holding. It was the youngest prince and his son's best friend. Schlatt! Theseus cried, reaching out a tiny hand to him. The Chancellor leaped over what he prayed was not Technoblade's body and through the balcony doors. Let him go, you fucking prick! He had almost reached the boy and his captor when another man appeared out of nowhere with a loaded crossbow in hand. The arrow from the crossbow fired and buried deeply into Schlatt's shoulder, sending him reeling back into the wall.
This didn't stop him, however, from frantically trying to reach Theseus as he jumped from the wall and lunged for the masked man. Stubborn bitch, aren't you? The brunette captor with white goggles sneered before hitting Schlatt in his jaw with the brunt of his crossbow, knocking him out. It was maybe a minute or two before Schlatt stirred himself back to life, refusing to let the bastards get away with Theseus. But by the time he was able to shakily steady himself upright, the men had disappeared, and Theseus along with them.
And then there was a knock at the door of his office that Schlatt blurrily lifted his head up to, stirring from his nightmarish slumber. He was dreaming of that night again.
He had to admit, he truly thought he'd banished the memory of that night from his mind. But it seems the guilt had come back to haunt him once more. Come in, he rasped, his head pounding for what he knew would be a nasty hangover later on. A head full of strawberry blonde hair peered in, his glasses nearly catching on the doorframe, and Schlatt tilted his head at the sight of Quackity's ward. What are you doing here, little slime?
The boy shuffled inside and closed the door behind him. He wrung his hands nervously for a moment, looking away before he spoke. Quackity wants to know if you have any news on Prince Wilbur. He's very worried. He would have come himself, but he knows you won't kick me out, and he doesn't want anyone to know he worries. I don't know why he hides that he worries. I think you should always show up when you're worried. Charlie rambled on with a grin. Oh, Charlie. Schlatt chuckled at the boy's rushed words and the way he was rocking himself comfortably on the balls of his feet. Quackity's a smart man. Too smart, if you ask me. But he also has a tight grip on his emotions, so he doesn't tend to openly share them. Regardless, I understand his concern. He was born a commoner like me. We both had to struggle to stay alive, which meant we couldn't afford to be weak. It's either be smart as a fox, or be weak as a lamb.
Did he tell you that? Schlatt asked, eyeing the boy as he walked to his desk confidently. He crossed his arms on the table and sat his chin atop them. The boy nodded. He also told me you were the smartest man in Lemanburg. He also said once that Prince Wilbur is smart too. And who do you think taught Wilbur what he knows? The boy was made to be cunning and sharp as a knife, and that's why he'll make a great emperor one day, hopefully long from now. But I was the one who taught him to use his mind the way his brother wields his sword. Both the blade and the brain are powerful weapons. Schlatt reclined in his chair. Tell me, boy, how old are you? I'm 8. And how old were you when you first came to Quackity?
Charlie's face scrunched up in thought. I think I was 5 or 6? I don't remember. And what have you learned in the years you've been here? Charlie looked down at the desk for a long moment. His intense green eyes were focused on a portrait of Tubbo and himself on his desktop. Something burned in his expression, and for once, Schlatt couldn't get a good read on the child. He had no idea what was going through his mind.
Finally, he spoke. Before I came here, I was nothing but a street urchin. I had nothing. No mom or dad. Just another orphan littering the streets, Charlie explained, with the mildly disturbing lack of emotion.
Sorry.
You can't just say L.
I'm sorry. Sorry about the interruption of your section.
It's
and also
okay.
The L.
L.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It was funny. It made me giggle.
I'm glad. I like to make you laugh.
Shush. Here, I'll just do finally he spoke again.
Mhm.
Blah, blah, blah. Finally, he spoke. Before I came here, I was nothing but a street urchin. I had nothing. No mom or dad. Just another orphan littering the streets, Charlie explained with a mildly disturbing lack of emotion. Then his face lit up. And then Quackity found me. He taught me what it meant to be human. He taught me how to read and write. He taught me to trust others. He taught me what it meant to live instead of surviving and how to be a kid again. Suddenly, Charlie raised his head, and Schlatt could see the same sharpness he taught Wilbur and Tubbo in his eyes. Most people think I'm slow, but Quackity says they're wrong. He says my greatest skill is my ability to listen, to gather information on people, to learn, to hear what people say without sparing me a second glance. I may be a child, but I know a lot, Chancellor. Suddenly, his eyes hardened. A lot more than most would believe for someone as small as me.
I wouldn't doubt it. You seem plenty smart to me. Now you asked about Wilbur? The blonde nodded, and Schlatt sighed. I have nothing for Quackity as of yet, but tell him when we find the twins, after the king, he'll be the second to know. Thank you, sir, the boy said, his energy deflating a bit at the lack of news. Schlatt shook his head. Please, you can call me Schlatt. Your wit has earned you that. The child grinned, and then his face fell once more as he lamented. I hope we find Tubbo soon. He's always been kind to me, and now so have you.
Charlie opened the door and called out cheerfully, as was his nature. Goodbye, Schlatt! The door closed, and Schlatt let out the first genuine smile since Tubbo's disappearance. Goodbye, little slime. Is he breathing? Wilbur panicked, as he and his brother fished Tommy from the river and set him onto the grass, his lips a terrifying shade of blue. He will if I have anything to do with it, Techno said, grasping his wrist. He felt for the pulse there for a long moment, then he paled, his eyes fearful.
Okay.
I was thinking of the same thing. Is he breathing? Is he
going to survive this? Who did this, Alexander? Did you know?
Mom, I'm so
Sorry for forgetting what you taught my son.
My son, we played piano. I taught you piano.
Oh, I think I know why it's lagging. It's because I'm downloading a video while I'm streaming.
Oh, I wonder.
Anyways, we're just gonna keep going.
Okay.
Crow flew to Wilbur's shoulder as his twin began pushing harshly against the boy's chest in a steady manner. She buried her beak into his curly hair, and Will didn't blame her. For the first time, he felt completely natural with her on his shoulder. Wilbur recognized this technique. He'd seen Bad and Skeppy do it several times on other patients. He knew what it meant, though. It meant he hadn't been quick enough. It meant his heart had probably stopped, which meant
Tommy was essentially dead. And it was his fault. He'd killed him. He'd killed him. He killed Tommy.
No, not yet. He's not dead yet. He can't be. Come on, Glow Boy, wake up. You have a shit ton of explaining to do. I said I'd take you to the lights. I damn well meant it, Wilbur said, grasping his hand. Nobody should be able to do what you can do. Nobody should be able to do what you can do, so prove it. Breathe right now. Show Techno and me just how much of a glow stick you are right now. How much of a what? His words, not mine. Just keep pushing, Wilbur exclaimed, his voice frantic, and then
something strange, or in Wilbur's case, miraculous, happened. Wilbur and Technoblade watched in pure confusion and amazement, though Techno never stopped doing compressions, as Tommy's hair turned into a silvery white for perhaps a minute before fading back to a golden blonde. The two stared at the boy in shock for a solid minute before eventually, Techno peered up at his twin. Glowing, you said? Techno asked, and Wilbur nodded in astonishment. And then Tommy took a deep inhale, his eyes fluttering a bit before scrunching up in discomfort.
The boy sucked in another pained gasp, and Wilbur could almost feel the burn within his lungs. Techno pulled away and let out a long sigh of relief. Tommy? Wilbur rasped, gently holding the boy's shoulder as he swam back to consciousness. And then Tommy turned himself over to expel the river water from his lungs. Wilbur watched as his twin hesitantly set his hand on the teen's back, patting it gently as Tommy gagged. Easy, kid, easy. Get it all out, Techno soothed in a surprisingly gentle tone that Wilbur didn't hear all that often. The teen retched for another minute or two as he cleared his lungs. The teen retched for another minute or two as he cleared his lungs until finally his coughing subsided. As soon as it was over, Tommy crumpled to the ground, wincing as he wrapped his arms gently around himself. Wilbur tried to kneel closer to him, but the boy held up a hand and croaked, "Hold on. Just give me a second. And please don't freak out."
Wilbur nodded and chuckled weakly. I doubt there's anything that would surprise me at this point. The teen snorted and then winced as he gritted out, "Yeah, you'd think that." The moment the words left him, he started to glow again, and Wilbur watched Techno's eyes widen in disbelief. Instead of his hands, this time Wilbur could see his ribcage glowing through his sweater. "Oh," he mouthed, his jaw going slack. Something about the way Tommy was holding his chest caught his eye. He was cradling spots where his ribs had cracked from Technoblade trying to revive him. If he looked close enough, he could actually see exactly where his ribs had broken. The thought sent a shudder up the man's spine.
Tommy's hand pressed down more firmly against the spots, and his hand began to glow as well. After a few moments, he moved it to another crack, and so on. Wilbur looked back to where Tommy's hands had first been placed, and another sound of disbelief jumped in his throat as he watched Tommy's ribs cinch themselves back together. The bones seemed to move on their own, slotting themselves back into place until there was no way to tell he'd ever been injured in the first place. Did you just... Techno trailed off and then sucked in a breath when the glow faded away, and Tommy choked out a wheeze. The teen lolled his head to the side to lazily look at Wilbur. "Surprised yet?" Tommy slurred, and Wilbur let out a startled chuckle and unconsciously brushed the still sopping wet hair out of Tommy's eyes.
Very much so. Yeah. That's pretty weird, kid. Not to mention impossible. Wilbur turned to his brother and smiled humorlessly at the expression of pure bafflement on his face. "Techno, if you keep staring, your eyes are going to burn a hole through the kid." Techno's gaze shot up and he sputtered, "Are you not the least bit perturbed by any of this?" "Tech, I almost drowned like 10 minutes ago. I'm almost 100% positive I'm in shock. Give me another hour and then ask me." Wilbur grinned. He gently helped the teen into a sitting position, letting him lean up against his side, and then asked the only thing he could think of at that moment.
"Are you okay?" Tommy laughed a bit loopily and replied, "I'm alive." It sounded more like a question than a statement. He then turned around to look at Wilbur and asked, "We're alive?" "We are, in fact, alive, surprisingly." Wilbur smiled down at him. Tommy let his head tilt to the side and he looked around at the forest and the river surrounding them. "Holy shit, we're alive!"
Okay, so he's also in shock. "Are we seriously just going to gloss over the fact that you glow?" Techno exclaimed, his brow furrowing in confusion. "I'm a super pog magic boy. That's all the explanation I need to give for now," Tommy said firmly, before slumping back against Wilbur, relishing in the brief comfort. The teen looked up at Wilbur and then frowned when he noticed the blood was still trailing down his head.
"I can fix that," he said bluntly. Wilbur eyed him curiously for a moment before shaking his head. "Let's get warm first before we worry about that. We almost died once today. I'd rather not let hypothermia get us now." As if on cue, Tommy shivered. Finally, Technoblade stirred himself out of whatever dazed state he'd been in and swallowed. "We can make a fire near the riverbank. It'll be dark soon anyway, and I'd rather us not travel too deeply into the woods." "Thank God, my back is killing me," Wilbur said absently. Tommy quirked his head in confusion at that, but then assumed he probably was referring to the way they'd slammed into the wall back at the cave.
"No," Schlatt murmured, his body tilting over the edge of the balcony dangerously as he cried out in pain. "Schlatt!" a voice called out from behind, and the brunette turned to see the queen at the room's threshold with Philza's body lying in her arms. "Your Majesty?" Jay Schlatt croaked, dizzy from blood loss due to the wound in his shoulder. Kristen looked back at him with a pale expression, and Schlatt's heart sank. "Is he...?" "Not for long, I promise," Kristen said. Then she looked down at the unmoving forms of her boys and asked tearfully, "Tell me they're alive, Schlatt."
Oh my gosh, my heart.
Shit!
Schlatt broke off the end of the arrow buried in his shoulder, leaving the other half in to clot the bleeding, and then kneeled by the unmoving form of Prince Technoblade. He picked up the pink-haired boy in his arms, ignoring the pain in his shoulder and listening for the steady sound of his breath. He breathed out a sigh of relief when the boy's chest rose and fell at a steady pace. He hoisted the unconscious boy into his good arm and moved on to Wilbur, who was slumped against the wall between his bed and Techno's. He looked over the boy for a moment before noticing the hitched but still stable sound of Wilbur's breathing. He set Techno down at Wilbur's side and turned to the Queen. "They're alive," Schlatt said, and knelt by Filza, his heart catching in his throat at the sight of the wound in the king's stomach.
Phil wasn't breathing. Oh, gods. Schlatt trembled and grabbed one of Phil's hands. There wasn't a pulse. "Come on, brother, don't do this. Don't do this. Your boys need you now more than ever." His voice shook violently as he tried to hold back his emotions. Suddenly, Kristen grabbed him his arm, and Schlatt looked up at the saddest look he'd ever seen in her eyes. She swallowed, then spoke. "I need you to do something for me, Jay Schlatt."
The Chancellor nodded, too afraid his voice would break if he spoke. "Take care of them, Schlatt," Kristen whispered. "I can save him, but I won't be able to come back." "What?" Schlatt gasped and turned to look back at the twins, who were unconsciously clinging to one another. "But I was only ever meant to save them. Nobody else." Kristen shook her head tearfully, her hand gripped tighter as her resolve solidified. "Tell Phil, when he wakes up, that I love him, that I love our sons, that I'll do everything in my power to bring Theseus back, and that I'm sorry."
Schlatt shook his head. "Sorry for what?" Kristen turned away and said something Schlatt would take with him to his grave. "I knew what would happen. I've always known. But I can't let him die, Schlatt, I can't." Schlatt's expression went blank as the words stuck in. She knew that Theseus was going to be taken. That Phil was going to... She knew.
"And she did nothing." He jerked his arm away, repulsed. "And you didn't tell him? All these years? And you didn't say a goddamn word? How do you tell someone that their child was doomed to a fate worse than death long before they were born?" Kristen pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "By saving Phil, I'll change things. I'll give my son a fighting chance, a chance to make his own destiny. I couldn't tell him, and neither can you. For Theseus' sake." Kristen placed a hand on the gaping hole in Phil's stomach. "Promise me, Jay Schlatt. For my sons, for your son, for the kingdom, for Phil."
And while every atom in his body wanted to rage at the cruel world, Schlatt merely nodded his head and turned his face away. The words left his lips like burning wax dripping onto dry parchment. "I promise, but not for you. For Phil." He squeezed his eyes shut as he saw a blindingly golden light flash behind his eyelids. And then it was gone. And so was the Empress.
Ow.
Ew, my God.
Ow! Owie! Ow, ow, ow. Everything hurts and I'm dying.
Owie.
Anyways, I like pain. Schlatt jarred awake, nearly falling from his chair as the nightmare memory coiled like a snake around his heart. He turned his chair and put his head in his hands, letting his elbows rest on his thighs as he caught his breath. "Fuck," the ram muttered, and then wiped away the dampness from his cheeks. Why? Why now? Why was he reliving this now? Could the universe just cut him a goddamn break?
Suddenly, there was a knock at his door, and Phil's voice rang from the other side. "Can I come in?" Apparently not. The Chancellor stumbled to his feet and to the doorway, opening it for the Emperor. "Your Majesty," he said half-heartedly, not looking up at the man in the eye as he rounded his face. His desk. His face. Oopsies.
"None of that shit tonight," Phil retorted, exhaustion and exasperation written across his face as he pulled up a chair in front of Schlatt's desk. Schlatt nodded and handed the man a glass. Very well. Phil. Have you been stalking here all afternoon? The ram snorted as he pulled a bottle of rum from his cabinet. Among other things, mostly I've been trying to sleep.
Sorry. Did I wake you? Phil leaned back in his chair, pouring himself a glass. Schlatt shook his head as he sat back down and made himself his own drink. No, I woke myself up. The Chancellor was sure he looked as beaten down as Phil did. The blonde turned his glass absent-mindedly in his hand for a moment before asking, "Bad dream?" Schlatt's expression glossed over for a moment. The glow faded and Schlatt peeled open his eyes, looking around and then down at Phil.
The hole in his abdomen was gone, and Schlatt finally let himself breathe when he felt a pulse at Phil's wrist. The guards around the sector were most likely dead considering no one had come to their aid, so that meant it was up to him to get help. Schlatt squeezed Phil's hand tight in his own and for a moment and lamented sorrowfully. I couldn't save him, Phil. God damn it. Finally, a choked sob tore through Schlatt and he had to take a moment to pull himself together. I'm sorry. I couldn't save him. I'm so sorry.
With that, Schlatt stood from the ground. His knees nearly buckled as the world around him swayed from blood loss. It didn't matter if he bled out. He just needed to get to Puffy. Yeah, something like that, Schlatt replied, his voice drained of emotion as he took a sip from his drink. Phil looked up at him, his gaze searching. The ram stared back, feeling like an ant beneath a microscope, burning alive under the intense heat of the sun. Did you mean it? Phil asked after a long moment. Schlatt huffed and set down his drink. He didn't see the point in playing dumb.
I don't know. No, probably. Phil nodded and eyed the painting of Tubbo on his desk, thoughtfully. You aren't nothing without him, Schlatt. There's more to you than just your love for your son, as there is more to me. We are not defined by our children, Phil assured him. Schlatt's brow knitted as he rebuked the response. I know that, he hissed, and tried to keep his expression steady as the memory flashed again through his mind.
Schlatt staggered through the hallway, taking note of the dead soldiers that littered every entrance. Their necks had either been sliced or an arrow had been shot through their eyes. A quick death. A silent one. An assassin's work, too, at that.
No, not an assassin. A kidnapper. Schlatt gripped the railings tightly as he descended the stairs, hopeful that there would be a guard on the other side to assist him. He opened the door to the officials' hallway and stumbled right into the grasp of a knight that Schlatt immediately recognized. Ted, he rasped as the knight held him up, his eyes wide.
Your Grace, what the hell happened? Sound the alarm and take me to the captain. Prince Theseus has been taken and the Emperor and the Princess have been injured. Ted nodded and yelled out to one of his fellow men to wake the warden and the captain and to sound the bells. He lowered the injured man to the ground and ripped the cape off of his own back. There's no time, Schlatt interjected, gripping his wrists.
Ted shook his head. I'm not going to leave little Tubbo without a father tonight, Schlatt. Now hold still, this isn't going to be pleasant. Ted reached down to Schlatt's belt and fished out a flask of whiskey he had been so confident he'd find. For once, your love for alcohol has saved your life, Ted said with a smile, and then pulled out the rest of the arrow before Schlatt could answer. Schlatt bit into his cheek harshly as he suppressed his pain, and the skin gave way when he felt the sharp sting of alcohol poured into his wound. This time he could not contain the groan that slipped from his mouth.
I hate you, you know that? Schlatt hissed, clutching onto the man's arms. Ted grinned as he tore strips of fabric from his cloak and began winding it around his shoulder. Don't lie, Your Grace. We all know I'm your favorite knight. Maybe, but I still hate you the most. You should be thankful. I could have let Puffy fix you up, and she's a lot less gentle than I.
Well, aren't I the lucky one? Nobody's lucky this night, Schlatt, Ted said mournfully, and the Chancellor nodded and let his head thud back against the floor. Yeah, no fucking kidding. Suddenly, one of the doors slammed open and Schlatt turned to see Puffy staring at him with wide eyes. Schlatt! The man shook his head and gestured to the door. Fret over me later. You need to start searching for Theseus. They took him. 2 men, one with brown hair and white goggles, the other a dark blonde-haired man cloaked in a green hood and a white mask with a smile. Let the guards get Phil and the twins to bed.
Tubbo? Puffy asked, reaching his side, her hand tightly clasped around his. He's fine. He was with me when I heard their screams. I'll get him from his hiding spot myself. He will only come out if he hears me. And you? Are you all right? Puffy asked, and Schlatt's voice caught in his throat. I wasn't fast enough. I saw him. He reached out for me and called my name, and I couldn't reach him.
Puffy gripped his hand tighter. You were outnumbered. It's not your fault. I should have... You'll drive yourself mad if you start with that shit. Schlatt interjected, and the sheep rolled her eyes. Says you. Schlatt snorted and offered Puffy his good arm, letting the woman pull him to his feet. He swayed unsteadily for a moment before Puffy lent him her shoulder.
Her eyes turned up to Ted, and she gave the man a soft smile. Thank you, Ted, for saving my brother. Aww. If Schlatt had been a softer man, he would have cried at the words. His Grace is too fucking stubborn to die in my arms. Ted laughed, and then nodded. His eyes turned down and he gave her a soft smile. I'll keep an eye on your little one, Captain. Now please, save His Majesty's little one, for his sake and for the sake of the Empire. Puffy will find them, Phil assured, though it sounded like he was mostly trying to assure himself. Schlatt jolted a bit as he cleared his head.
You don't know that, Schlatt argued. Where was this talk this morning? Where was this unwavering confidence when you practically threw Puffy out of your office? Phil simmered, his wings ruffling behind him as he retorted, I realized she was right. I can't afford to stay negative, and neither can you. We have a job to do, and I'll go crazy if I keep moping around like this. So will you. And what do you want from me, Phil? Do you want me to go back to work and pretend everything is fine? Pretend our sons aren't missing? Pretend Theseus' birthday isn't right around the corner? Schlatt growled and felt the glass in his hand chip a bit at the hold he had on it. Phil's face was blank as he bluntly responded, Yes.
Schlatt set down the glass, watching as the alcohol sloshed back and forth before finally stilling to a halt. He looked to Phil, whose expression was as grave as his own. Finally, he nodded. Okay, then let's get back to work. His stomach twisted with guilt as Tubbo was forcibly pushed from his mind. Let it be known that this was not done with ease. Let it be known that by pushing Tubbo out of his thoughts, he pushed his own heart out as well.
Let it be known that for that night he wasn't anyone at all, and neither was Phil. And after a while the guilt faded too, until neither Schlatt nor Phil could feel anything at all, only static. There was a knock at the door, and Tubbo shoved a hand over his mouth as he pushed himself further into the corner of Phil's desk, trying to scrunch himself up as small as he possibly could. He tried his best to stifle the sobs spilling from his mouth, and then felt his heart drop to his stomach when he heard the door creak open.
Don't want to die, the 5-year-old thought as he sucked in a silent breath as footsteps entered the room. Tubbo? His father's voice called out, but Tubbo shook his head and buried his face into his knees. Liar! Liar!
Liar! It's not him. It's a trick. The monster is coming to get me.
Kid, come on out. It's me, Tubbs. It's Dad. I don't believe you. Tubbo's voice shook as he spoke. What was the point of hiding? The monster was going to find him anyway. He whimpered as he heard the imposter take a seat beside the desk, just barely out of sight. I know you're scared, kid, but I promise it's me. I'm right here. The voice soothed, and Tubbo placed his small hands over his ears and shut his eyes tightly.
He could feel the imposter moving again, and then there was a gentle hand grasping one of his. Tubbo screeched, Don't touch me! Leave me alone! The hand receded instantly, and the voice sighed. What can I do to prove it's me, Tubbo? Tubbo let the hands at his ears slide down a bit, but kept his eyes shut tight as he spoke. What's my favorite color? The voice let out a weak laugh, but still responded gently. You have several. Do you want me to name them all?
Tubbo nodded. Blue, pink, and yellow. All in that order. Okay, that was an easy one. You still could be the monster, Tubbo argued. All right, ask me another question then. Tubbo thought hard for a long moment, his tear-stained cheeks scrunching up in concentration. Where do I want to go most in the whole world?
You want me to take you to see the ocean. You said you wanted to see if water could be You said you wanted to see if water could be really salty. It doesn't make sense for it to be salty. All the other water isn't salty. Why is the ocean? And then realization hit him. The only person he'd told that to had been... Tubbo opened his eyes. Dad? I'm right here, Tubbo. I came back to get you, just like I said I would.
Is the monster gone? The child's voice shook, and he saw his father stretch out his arms for him to run into. Yes, Tubbo. His father's voice was tearful, and Tubbo sobbed as he barreled himself into his chest. Schlatt's arms wrapped tightly around him, and he felt one hand card gently through his hair. Dad! Tubbo cried, as he buried his face into his shirt. You were so brave. So brave. I'm so proud of you. It's over, buddy. Schlatt consoled, and then carefully pulled the boy back, holding his face in his hands. I'm here. I promise I'll never let anyone take you from me. I'll never let anyone hurt you, I promise. Never.
Oh God, I'm gonna cry. Tubbo realized at that moment that this was the first time he'd ever seen his father cry. And it terrified him almost as much as the sounds he'd been hearing from beneath the desk. I was scared, Dad. I thought the monster had gotten you. Then his gaze trailed to where his father's shoulder had been bandaged, and his eyes widened. It did get you! It did, but I'm still here. And you did so well, kid, Schlatt said, brushing the boy's bangs out of his eyes. The child nodded and pushed himself back into the ram's arms once more, this time wrapping his arms around his father's neck so he could bury his face into his shoulder.
I thought I was going to be alone. I don't want to be alone, Tubbo whimpered, and Schlatt hugged the boy tighter. I won't ever leave you. You're stuck with me forever. Sorry. Schlatt laughed, pulling a small giggle from the still shaking child. If I'm stuck with you, then you're also stuck with me.
Aww.
Schlatt felt the boy's words tug at his heartstrings, and he felt a moment of peace in the eye of a raging storm. He knew it wouldn't last. He knew the brief happiness on his son's face would crumple into dust soon. He knew he'd have to tell him what happened to his best friend.
Oh, God. But that was the future. For now, in this moment, he felt relief like no other at the steady rhythm of his son's heart and the even pace of his breath. Tubbo was safe and sound in his arms. I wouldn't have it any other way, kid.
Oh, okay. Tubbo! Tubby! Okay. Come on, Ossium. The brunette gently pet the horse's bony frame as he walks next to him, allowing the steed a rest while they trailed at the edge of the forest. The sun was beginning to dip beneath the horizon for the night. He'd need to make a camp soon. They had made it through the kingdom without too much of a fuss. They dodged a few guards here and there, but the dark blue hood he had pulled over his horns kept him mostly hidden from anyone who might recognize him. Now he just had to keep himself from getting mugged. Or stabbed.
Easy. He wasn't weak, despite popular belief. Tubbo tended to use his small stature to his advantage in convincing others he wasn't a threat. Even to Rambu, Tubbo was an alchemist, an inventor. And a damn good one. Not all of his contraptions were peaceful. His brush with death when he was a child had given him quite the perspective on how dangerous people could be. So he'd learn from it.
I'm sorry. Gunpowder. A fine, surprisingly sticky powder that had blown off half his face. So what did Tubbo do with it? He'd taken the very thing that had nearly killed him and turned it into a weapon. a fine contraption made of wood and metal that used gunpowder as a charge to fire small chunks of metal at a target. Or as Tubbo referred to it, a gun. He turned his invention around in his hands thoughtfully for a moment and looked back to the castle that was slowly getting further and further away. The brunette sighed as guilt prickled at him. I'm sorry, Dad. Sorry, Rombu. I'll be home soon.
He turned back to the open woods ahead, following whatever direction Ossium took him, and all while scanning the area around him for any sign of the princes. Suddenly the hair on the back of his neck rose, and his ear twitched at the sound of poorly concealed footsteps trailing him. Tubbo grinned, a tad maliciously, as he stopped dead in his tracks, waiting for the person behind him to make a move. Say, it's a mighty fine horse you have there, lad.
Tubbo swiftly concealed his weapon from sight as he turned to face whatever idiot was trying to mug him for his horse. The brunette plastered an innocent smile to his face and said cheerfully to the man, who was clearly hiding a knife in his offhand, Thank you, sir. Raised little Boner all by myself, I did. He's quite the steed. He's gotten my family through some tough times. What kind of name is Boner? The man sneered, immediately dropping the nice guy act, and Tubbo smirked. What kind of idiot brings a knife to a gunfight? A what? Fight? The stranger finally took out his weapon and pointed it at the teen. Tubbo didn't flinch as he threatened, Hand over the horse, kid. I won't ask twice.
At that, Tubbo unholstered his gun and laughed as he aimed the barrel right in the middle of the man's forehead. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The fuck is that thing? The man's eyes widened, and Tubbo felt a rush of adrenaline at the flicker of fear in his eyes. Do you know what a firework is? Tubbo asked, clicking the safety off. Of course I fucking do, you brat. Now give me the damn horse before I gut you, he snarled, taking another step closer.
Oh, no need to get all worked up. How about instead of the horse, I blow off your fucking head? I'm sure your brains would make a nice addition to the scenery.
Oh.
You're fucking crazy, kid. No, I won't ask again. And then the man gasped as the knife whizzed through the air and entered his back. The stranger's eyes rolled back and he fell to the ground.
Oh.
Tubbo scoffed, slightly annoyed, but clicked the safety back on for another fight. He looked up at who had interrupted him and paled. Ronbu was sitting atop Carl with a terrifying glare as he slotted one of his throwing knives back into place. Oh, hey, Bran. I see you've met my friend. Tubbo winced as he gestured to the man who was still twitching on the ground, drowning in his own blood.
Quite the companion. Real violent type. Rumbu deadpanned as he jumped off from Carl, making his way over to him. Tubbo stumbled back and raised his hands. I know what it looks like, but listen, Rumbu, Rumbu stepped over the man who tried to attack him, nearly kicking as he drew closer. He looked fucking pissed. Tubbo panicked. Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. And then he was being pulled into a bone-crushing hug, and all the fear vanished at the warmth of his friend. Tubbo melted into the hug and Rumbu let out a sigh. You're an idiot.
Sorry, Tubbo mumbled into his chest. Rumbu pulled back and looked him over for any injuries. Tubbo chuckled. I'm fine, Boo. Not a scratch on me. Rumbu grabbed his shoulders, slightly shaking him as he spoke. You are the most stubborn man I've ever had the displeasure of knowing. You scared the hell out of me. I had it sorted. I'm sure you did, Rumbu replied, entirely genuine. But what kind of friend would I be if I didn't worry?
Tubbo shook his head. I couldn't sit around and do nothing. I had to go after them. I know, but I just... Rumbu trailed off, dropping his head for a moment. We're a package deal. Where you go, I go. You can't get rid of me that easily. Tubbo's eyes sparkled with excitement. So you'll help me?
I'm here, aren't I? Rumbu relented, his eyes fond. The brunette beamed and hugged him once more. Thank you, Ran. I owe you for this. Damn right.
Aww.
Oh, I love Tubbo with the gun. Tubbo with the gun.
Tubbo with the gun.
Oh,
I can't believe B Duo isn't dead in this fanfic.
Oh, what? No. You need to. Okay.
I'm so out of
I actually
control.
cannot finish this chapter. I have to go cry now because of that comment. Thank you very much.
Man. Anyways, that's a fun chapter. This one will make you sob.
No. I can't do this
Hey,
anymore.
just get ready to pull out your dream voice, okay?
Yes. That's the. Oh, I loved pulling out my dream voice.
Chapter 17. Brother knows best. Wilbur, I swear to fucking God, if you do not hold still! Tommy griped. Tommy griped as he tried to clean the wound before he attempted to heal it. He had to make sure there was nothing in it that would heal over. He knew from experience that not cleaning a wound properly could lead to a nasty infection. It hurts! That was my Tommy voice. It hurts, Wilbur hissed, wincing when Tommy dabbed the wet cloth in his hand at it once more. You're such an infant, Tommy said, rolling his eyes. Wilbur scoffed. Says the actual child. At least I'm not the one crying over a scrape.
Suddenly, Techno's voice cut in as he appeared from the woods with more firewood in his arms. As much as I'd love to hear you two bicker like a bunch of toddlers, he trailed off for a moment and then retorted. Actually, you know what? I don't love it. Shut the fuck up. Tommy chuckled and grabbed a few branches from Techno's pile and placed them onto the fire. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Crow lounging once again in Techno's woolen hood. I'm starting to think she likes you more than me. Must be my colorful personality, Techno snarked, and turned his head to see the bird perk up at him. Crow gently nuzzled the man's cheek with her head, and Tommy gasped dramatically.
I feel so betrayed right now. Techno laughed. I propose a trade, kid. You take Wilbur, and I'll take the bird. Tommy wrinkled his nose at that. I think I'd rather drown again. Suddenly, a pine cone was being chucked at him as Wilbur grumbled, Rude. Tommy stuck his tongue out at him, and then stood from the small fire and walked back over to Wilbur, who visibly tensed at the cloth in his hand.
Hold still, or I'll let Crow loose on you, Tommy threatened, only half joking. Wilbur frowned. Why is everyone ragging on me tonight? You have a very insultable face, Tommy grinned, and quickly took the opportunity to clean the rest of the wound. After another once-over, he took a step back and asked, Ready to see my potty trick? As ready as I'll ever be, I guess. I'm not gonna grow a sixth finger or another head, right?
No, it's perfectly safe. Never had any issues with any extra limbs, but there's a first time for everything, I suppose, Tommy said deviously. Wilbur growled, You are an evil child. I'm not a child, I'm a big man. Now hush. Tommy turned to Techno and asked, Do you want to come and see, Techno? Tommy nodded. Whoa, Techno nodded. Yeah. Techno nodded and stood from the fallen tree he'd been sitting on. He walked over and sat on the ground facing Wilbur and Tommy by the fire. As soon as he settled, Tommy nodded shakily and pushed up his sleeves once more, suddenly feeling unusually nervous.
He felt Crow hop to his shoulder, and he took a deep breath before turning back to Wilbur. Tommy gently held up his hand, but before he pressed it to the wound, he hesitated and said, Just don't freak out. Wilbur's eyes softened, and he nodded. Tommy turned to Techno, who eyed his twin for a moment before nodding as well. The blonde exhaled and shut his eyes, allowing the magic to trail down his arm into his hand once more, lighting it up. He pressed his fingers to the side of Wilbur's temple and waited. He heard Techno let out a soft gasp, and Tommy carefully pried open his eyes to examine his expression. Tommy felt relief flood through him when he, instead of fear, found fascination written across the man's face. The last of the wound closed up, and Tommy was about to pull away when Wilbur suddenly grabbed Tommy's injured wrist, gently. He shot the man a confused look until Wilbur grabbed his other hand, which was still glowing, and carefully placed it atop his injured wrist. Tommy stiffened, but didn't pull away, and neither did Wilbur.
The teen stared at the injury and felt something tight well up in his throat as the bruise that Dream had given him faded from sight. He could feel Wilbur analyzing his expression, but if he saw anything, the man didn't comment on it. Instead, he simply released Tommy as soon as the bruise was gone. Tommy looked down at his wrist as if it was still foreign to him. He tried to recall if Dream had ever made him heal himself. A couple of memories surfaced, but all of them were unpleasant and spiteful. What Wilbur had done was neither. He hadn't even forced him to do it. Tommy could have pulled away at any moment. In fact, why did Wilbur care if his wrist was healed in the first place? It's not like it was hurting the brunette. It was on his arm.
Why bother? Tommy didn't understand. So, Techno trailed after a long moment of silence. Tommy looked at him, and the man asked, "How long have you been able to do that, exactly?" Tommy let out a laugh. "Quite a long time. It started happening after my parents and sister died."
The twins stiffened at that, but Tommy merely shook his head and continued. I was pretty little, so I don't remember them very well. Dream told me people would come after me for my power, that they wanted to use it for themselves. What happened to your family? What happened to your family, if you don't mind me asking? Wilbur said cautiously. Tommy frowned. They were killed by raiders who destroyed my village. My sister was special like me. That part was only a half lie. Drista was special, but not for the reasons they think.
After that, Dream never trusted people again. I was all he had left. That's why he's so protective. That's why I never left. And Tommy trailed off, his eyes sad. You never left that tower, Wilbur finished, and Tommy looked up at him. And you're still going back? Techno asked. Tommy turned sharply and said, "No!" He bit his lip and huffed. "Yes! God, I don't know!" Tommy slumped defeatedly against the tree and sighed. "It's complicated."
Well, you don't have to if you don't want to. Nobody deserves to be a prisoner in their own home. Not even necklace thieves, Wilbur said with a grin, and Tommy punched him playfully in the arm. After a moment of heavy silence, Tommy asked, So, what's your tragic backstory, since we're sharing it all? Wilbur looked at Techno for a moment, and the man shrugged. The brunette fiddled with his hands as his brother spoke. Wilbur and I were born in the Nether. Our birth mother was a piglin, and we never knew of our birth father. All we know is that he was a human. Our tribe hated us for being hybrids, so they abandoned us for dead. It was Phil, our father, who saved us. He brought us to the overworld and adopted us.
And your brother? Tommy asked. Unsure, and Techno stiffened, but Wilbur jumped in before he could react. I told him a little when we were trapped in the cave, Wilbur explained, and Techno settled a little, but still appeared tense. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. Tommy let his head drop. Wilbur shook his head. It's okay. Our brother wasn't from the Nether, Wilbur trailed off, and Tommy raised an eyebrow at the hesitation. He also was adopted. Our mother found him one night and brought him home. But he was human. His name was Theseus.
Theseus. His name was Theseus? Huh. That's a cool name.
That necklace was his, Techno said, a bit bitterly, and Tommy nodded shamefully, looking down at his feet. I'm sorry about that. I never would have done that if I had known. Techno stared at him a moment longer before his expression softened, and he said, I believe you. As long as you fulfill your end of the deal, then it's in the past, I suppose. I'm sorry that you lost him. I know I've lost a sibling, but I never knew Drista well. Not that I can remember.
Wilbur nodded, and then gave him a small smile. He would have liked you, I think. What was he like? Tommy asked, resting his head against the tree, the fire warm and comforting. To his surprise, it was Techno who answered. Theseus was a little shit, to be blunt. Very devious, but always trying his best to make others laugh. He loved to cause trouble, though. He knew how to use his age to his advantage to get what he wanted from adults, but he was also very caring and kind. He never hesitated to say exactly what was on his mind, and he would have talked your ear off if you'd let him. Was he ever annoying? Tommy asked, and Wilbur snorted.
Every damn day of his life. Both Techno and Wilbur's expressions were lost in the past, and Tommy smiled. You don't get to talk about him much, do you? Most people tend to avoid the subject of him like the plague, and whenever they do, it's always sympathetic or depressing. You're the first person in a long time to actually ask us stuff about him. Techno replied, his face sad. Tommy's eyes widened in surprise, and he sputtered, Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to talk about someone you love, even if they're gone?
Wilbur piped in at that. Most people think it would be too painful of a topic for us, which it is, but we'd rather talk about the good times than not at all. Tommy looked down for a moment and then gave Wilbur a smile. Then, if you want, you can talk about him to me, and I promise I won't get all mopey or cringe. Techno gave him a small smile, and the brunette snorted back a laugh. This time he didn't hesitate when he ruffled the kid's hair. You're a weird kid, but thank you. The boy smacked away his hands and barked, You're fucking weird, bitch! I am awesome!
While we're on the subject of weird, Techno cut in on their antics and then turned to Crow, who was sleeping on his shoulder. Tommy turned from his slap fight with Wilbur and quirked his head. Techno cleared his throat and asked, There isn't anything else magic about you or Crow, right? I mean, she isn't going to, like, shoot fire from her beak or shapeshift into some weird bird lady. Tommy looked at him for an odd moment and then burst out laughing. I'm serious! I've seen your bones snap together. I wouldn't be surprised by anything at this point.
Tommy simply snorted and shook his head. No, Techno, I promise my bird is not actually a person or a fire-breathing dragon. She's just a crow. Wilbur yawned at that and raised up his hands, stretching. Speaking of crows, my wing is dying right now. I hope you don't mind, Tommy. Something in Tommy's brain shorted out when he said that. Your what?
The blonde visibly paled and his eyes went wide as he stammered. What? Wilbur straightened up and explained. Oh, I guess you've never seen one before? My brother and I are volants. We each have a wing. They stay in on backs, and usually when we're out, but they get a bit cramped if we don't let them out at night. With that, the brunette shook out a startlingly large crow wing with black and blue feathers from his back, and Tommy jumped backward in shock. It wasn't a moment later that Techno followed with a mirror wing with red and black feathers. Tommy could feel his heartbeat in his ears as all the warnings and lectures he had received from Dream over the years on the danger of wings came bubbling to the surface.
No, that's dangerous. You'll get caught. You'll get us all caught. Tommy? Wilbur tilted his head, concerned at the boy's frightened expression. He reached out a hand to him, but Tommy flinched away, his breath spastic. You're gonna get us all killed. Are you crazy? You have to hide those. Tommy's voice shook violently as he eyed the forest like a hawk, searching for any sign of trappers. What do you mean? No one's out here for miles, Tommy.
Tommy shook his head and placed his hands in his hair as he bent over trying to calm himself. Instead, he stuttered. Angel hunters, they'll kill you if they see those. Please, you have to hide them. I don't want them to hurt you or me. Please. Tommy sank to his knees and shut his eyes tight. He felt two hands against his shoulders and surprised himself when he didn't flinch away. Instead, he listened to Wilbur's soft voice. Tommy, there are no more angel hunters. Not around these parts, anyway. The Emperor drove them out years ago. You're safe. We won't let anything happen to you, okay? What?
The blonde couldn't help himself as he leaned forward into Wilbur's arms, much to the brunette's surprise. Wilbur tensed for a moment before eventually wrapping his arms around the teen. They'll catch you, Tommy. They'll kill you. No, Wilbur said they wouldn't.
Who am I supposed to believe? Tommy wobbled and felt another hand on his shoulder. He peered up from Wilbur's arms and saw Techno looking back at him with... He saw... attentiveness? No, perhaps concern? It was as if...
Tommy didn't know how to describe the caution in Techno's crimson eyes, but it radiated a fondness he'd only seen from one other person. And it wasn't from Dream. It was from Wilbur. Why? Why are they looking at me like they care?
Tommy's eyes welled up with tears, and he shook his head. I don't understand. I can't, he said. Wilbur stiffened. Tommy, do you have wings? Tommy's heart practically stopped in his chest as an icy fear washed through him. His grip on Wilbur's coat tightened like a vice as he panicked. No, please. I don't. I swear, I don't have wings. Please. Wilbur hugged him tighter and spoke gently. Shh. It's okay, Tommy. You don't have to tell us. I'm sorry I asked. I won't make you say it, but you're safe. I promise.
I'm sorry. Tommy wept, and this time it was Techno who spoke. Don't be. You've nothing to be sorry for, kid. Tommy nodded into Wilbur's chest, and something stirred in his mind at the smell of coffee and summer rain in Wilbur's coat. A sense of familiarity. It made him feel safe. That doesn't make any sense. So Tommy pulled away.
He mourned the comforting arms of Wilbur for a brief moment, then shakily stood to his feet, wrapping his arms around himself. The twins stared back at him with cautious expressions, and Tommy felt his face burn with shame. This was the second time today he'd lost it. They probably thought less of him now for it. Look at this scrawny-ass 15-year-old who can't even hold himself together for more than 5 minutes. Pitiful. Tommy eyed Wilbur's wing, and the knot in his stomach only grew. He was terrified. He was so incredibly scared that Wilbur was wrong. That the hunters would find them, that they would slaughter Techno and Wilbur in front of his eyes and go after him next. Or worse, they wouldn't. Instead, leaving him all alone. He didn't want to die. And he definitely didn't want to be alone anymore.
Did he lie? Why would he tell me that I don't understand. If they've been gone for years, then why? Tommy's expression was heartbreaking to look at. And the worst part of it all was that Tommy knew this wasn't a question the twins could answer. It just didn't make any sense. Dream would always come home ranting about the patrols he'd been searching for avians. On other days, he would tell him a sad story of kids he would find lying motionless in an alleyway or the forest. Their faces were pale and gray from blood loss. But if the angel hunters had been gone for years, then Dream had...
Tommy? Oh, shit. It's Tech now. Oopsies. I went Wilbur mode. Tommy, you're shaking, Techno said gently, and the blonde simply stared back at him with an empty expression until finally the words registered. He held up his hands, which were trembling involuntarily, and frowned. Oh, sorry, I can't seem to stop.
Oh.
If there was a reaction to Tommy's odd statement, Techno didn't show it. Instead, he stood to his feet and pressed a hand to his shoulder. Come on, kid. Let's get you by the fire. It's time for us to get some sleep anyway. We have a long day tomorrow. The boy nodded absently and let himself be led back, all the while his mind was racing with only one thought standing out from the rest of the jumbled cacophony. Dream had lied.
Ooh, this is getting intense, like the circus.
Oh.
You'll like this section. Prepare your dream voice.
DNF
time. It's DNF time, baby.
Yeah.
Oh, little Theseus, you're getting too close.
Do what you have to do.
It'll confuse him even more, Dream. It could even hurt him. His mind could break.
I don't care. Do it. It's okay if he finds out I lied about the hunters, but he can't find out I lied out about his past too. Scramble his brains if you have to, just don't let him piece it together, George.
Tommy doesn't deserve this, Dream.
Whose fucking side are you on? We're so close to being done with this. I care about him too, but none of this means a damn if he figures out who he is. Once you've had your fun, let me handle the rest.
It's nightmare scene time, baby.
Yeah!
Get ready to be confused.
Oh no!
But in like for Theseus at least.
Okay.
Tommy Theseus? Who's that?
Huh?
How do I say blocks?
Thank you, redacted.
Thank you.
Oh my god, the Enderman.
I'm just gonna stay silent. That'll be for dramatic effect.
Yeah.
We rehearsed this, guys. We're actors.
Yeah.
That's Grian? Oh, yes! That is Grian. He said that at the ballroom. At the ball. The party.
Yeah.
I'm Grian. This is my Grian impression.
Oh.
Ska! Ska! Alright. Let's skedaddle. Thank you. I'm sure you'll have the best wings of us all. A friendly voice rang in his ears and Tommy's eyes shot open at the sound. He turned his head expecting to see Wilbur and Technoblade in the forest, but instead, he found himself alone in a room made of gold. It had a high roof, tall archways, and numerous crystal-like windows. It was beautiful. A golden ballroom. It was dark, and the only light that he could see was the moonlight that shone through the tall windows. Tommy stood to his feet and jolted slightly when he could hear his footsteps echo against the marble floor. He spun slowly as he took in more of his surroundings, and then looked upwards to see one large gold chandelier hanging from the ceiling.
Where the hell? He was dreaming, right? He must be dreaming. There was no way this was real. The place was practically from a storybook. Boys! Stay within sight of the... Okay? Don't go wandering too far off. A deep, gruff voice echoed faintly in his head, and Tommy felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle. He turned, and once again, no one was there.
Hello? Tommy called, his heart racing as he stumbled around the empty ballroom, and then froze when the distorted sound of an orchestra echoed, muffled through the ballroom. Suddenly someone began to sing. High in the halls of the kings who are gone, would dance with his ghosts.
This time, a woman's voice danced around in his mind, and Tommy scrambled backward, eventually falling back onto the floor. This wasn't real. What the fuck is happening?
The ones he had lost, and the ones he had found, and the ones who loved him the most.
Tommy gasped when a flash of blue shone briefly in front of him, and for a moment he could have sworn he'd seen two children dancing. The smaller one was standing on the other's feet.
The ones who've been gone for so very long. I forget how the song goes. He couldn't remember their names.
Another flash, and this time he saw a man and a woman dancing with one another, neither of which he recognized. In fact, he couldn't see their faces at all. They were shrouded by darkness. Despite this, they looked loving. They looked happy.
They spun him around on the damp old stone, spun away all his sorrow and pain.
Tommy screwed his eyes shut. He didn't want to see what the room wanted to show him next. Instead, he growled, "Okay, that's enough of that! Screw this creepy bullshit!"
And he never wanted to leave.
That's a fucking lie! I want to leave right the fuck now! Tommy hissed at the voice and ignored the sight of two small children running around the room in favor of the door.
I know what I saw! This time the voice he heard was small, that of a child. Tommy yanked harshly against the handle of the tall, dark oak door, but it didn't budge.
Shit! Let me out!
Never wanted to leave.
Shut the hell up!
And then there was a hand on his shoulder, and Tommy screeched. He turned, and the ballroom was gone.
Instead, he stood in the remains of a burning town. The smell of burning flesh flooded his nose, and Tommy was suddenly wishing he was back in the ballroom again.
They danced through the day and into the night.
There were screams all around him, as people frantically ran through the streets while being chased down by people in masks. He even saw one man on fire. As he woozily walked down the dirt roads that were stained with blood, he saw bodies littering the ground of all different ages. Some of them were children.
Through the snow that swept through the halls.
Tommy had to swallow back the nausea that washed over him. He knew what this place was, or at least he thought he did.
Logstershire. The wooden town. The hunters chasing people down in the streets. The terrible sight of the dead. Why, the only thing missing was... Dream! Run! Take him and get out of here! The girl of a voice called, and Tommy's eyes widened. He didn't recognize the voice, but had a pretty good idea of who it belonged to.
Tommy ran through the streets, chasing it down. He could almost see the burning house it was coming from when a boy no older than himself crashed into him, sending them both tumbling to the ground.
From winter to summer and winter again.
Dream! Someone called, and Tommy froze. He lifted his head up and was met with startling green eyes and the tan freckled face of his older brother. There was a thick gash bleeding freely down his face, and his eyes were filled with grief.
Well, Dream barely paid him a second glance as he turned down to search for what he'd dropped in their tumble. He let out a choked cry as he lifted a small child back into his arms from where he'd been thrown.
Tommy's eyes locked onto the child's blonde hair, and he gasped. It was him.
Till the walls did crumple and fall.
Dream, forget him, we have to run! Tommy turned to see a younger George waving to the boys from up the forest line. His dark brown hair and glasses were still the same, but he was much younger. Dream turned briefly to look at Tommy, and he sucked in a breath at the genuine terror he saw in his older brother's eyes. Dream cradled his younger self tightly against his chest and darted off, leaving Tommy in the dust.
And he never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave. Tommy tried to run after him, but the scene melted away and he landed face first on a wooden floor. For fuck's sake. Tommy lifted up his head and found himself in a hallway of windows that covered one side. It was dark, and once again the moonlight was his only guide as he picked himself up off the floor.
He wrapped his arms around himself at the chill in the air and began walking, wondering what horrors were next in store for him. Wake up. Please, someone wake me up. Please, someone wake me up.
Never wanted to leave.
The hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the only sounds he could hear were that of his bare feet thumping against the wood. Tommy ran his hand along the windows as he walked. It was too hazy to see anything out of it other than snow and fog. How the moon still illuminated the room was beyond him. It was a dream after all. No, more like a nightmare. Tommy! A voice further down the hall called, and the blonde froze. It wasn't a voice he recognized. It didn't really sound like a voice at all. It was much too distorted. Tommy felt a pit in his stomach, but pushed through. The sooner I get my guts ripped out or something, the sooner I can wake up, I suppose.
Tommy walked further down the hallway and eventually turned a corner to what looked like another wing of wherever the hell he was. There were 4 doors, and the second one on the left was wide open. And on the ground in front of it was...
Oh, shit.
Never wanted to leave.
There was someone on the ground lying down, face down, in their own pool of blood. They weren't moving. Tommy's legs shook as he walked towards the figure, terror gripping tightly against his heart. The figure had on a white shirt that was stained a dark crimson. Blonde hair covered his face, and Tommy could tell that the boy was young.
Ooh, maybe his age. He didn't know, it was too dark to tell. He knelt at his side, and the voice caught in his throat when he finally noticed where all the blood had been streaming from. There were 2 large gashes in the boy's back that trailed down to the bone.
Bile rose in his throat again as something else clicked in his brain. He grabbed the body by the shoulder and flipped the kid onto his back. Tommy screamed.
High in the halls of the kings who are gone.
He scuttered backward, away from himself as the hair shifted out of his face, feeling his own blue eyes, hazy and dead. It was him.
With would dance with his ghost.
Oh, fuck! Please, wake up. I need to wake up. Tommy hyperventilated while burying his face into his hands. Suddenly, the world around him began to shift, flapping back and forth rapidly between Lox's chair and the hallway.
Tommy looked down at himself again and froze. It was no longer himself on the floor in front of him. It was...
So, no! A voice cried out, and Tommy was shoved out of the way by Dream. He watched in stunned horror as his brother cradled their sister in his arms, begging for her to wake up. But Tommy knew she wouldn't. His sister had been dead for a long time.
The ones he had lost and the ones he had found.
He looked up from his siblings and sucked in a breath when he saw George, staring back at him with a blank expression. And then the man smiled. It's time to wake up, Tommy. You have a shadow watching you.
And the ones who had loved him the most. Yeah!
Holy crap!
Good job, us! Can we get a little claps in chat for that one?
Clapping, 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 clapping. Wow,
Clapping,
that was
clapping.
intense.
Whoa, you got a flight to Rome? GG, Jolie. Have fun with that.
Ooh.
Have fun with that,
Have
Jolie.
fun.
Slay.
Rome is fun.
Oh my gosh. I'm glad
Wow.
Woo! Alright.
Dang. Dang.
Dang, dang, diggity, dang, dang.
I like that song. It was good.
Yeah, it's from Game of Thrones.
Mm,
I've never watched the
Like-
show, but this song is pretty pog.
I liked it.
Yeah. It's in the playlist.
I know. I think it actually came up while I was reading that.
That's
possibly did.
so funny.
I feel like it might have. Because it's like there was like a part of it that sounded very familiar and I was like,
Yep. Alright. Time for some Neo Trio.
yeah, please. I need it after that.
Tommy shot upright with a gasp, the dream slipping away, already hazy. His heart pounded in his chest and sweat beaded down his brow. Oh my god, fuck me. Tommy whispered into the dark and rested his head against his knees while his heart calmed down. What the hell had that been? It was all just a hazy jumble of images in his brain now. He'd seen Drista and Dream. He'd seen himself. Dead. Then there was the ballroom he'd wandered around. Someone had been speaking to him, but he could no longer remember what had been said.
All he knew was that he wanted out of there. Then, Loxtcheer, where he had been born. He'd seen it razed to the ground in front of his very eyes. He'd seen his sister die. He'd seen Dream running from Loxtcheer with him. Was this just some of his old memories resurfacing? He thought they'd be gone for good, but apparently not. Apparently there were some things you couldn't ever truly forget. Tommy wrapped his arms around himself comfortingly in front of the dimming fire.
Tommy, you okay? The boy's head snapped upright to see Techno looking at him from his makeshift bed. Suddenly, Tommy noticed that there was something warm wrapped around his shoulders. He turned his head to look at the fabric and couldn't suppress the smile that bubbled onto his face. It was Wilbur's trench coat. Cry. Cry. Fanner. 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 Fanner.
Oh, he's so precious.
He's so, it's just he. I love the lighting here from like the fire.
It's really
glow and
pretty.
stuff. Oh. Tommy? Techno called again. Tommy stuttered. Sorry. I just had a bit of a nightmare. I'm fine, I promise.
Tommy looked behind Techno's bed to where Wilbur had set up his own and frowned. Wilbur wasn't in his bed. He was gone. Where's Will? Tommy asked, trying to hide the fear in his tone. Techno turned and grimaced at the lack of his twin. The man stood to his feet and shook his head. Probably taking a piss or something. I bet he's down by the river. I'll go check up on him and make sure he's not dead. Techno looked at Tommy and then handed the boy his frying pan. You stay here, kid. I'll be right back.
Tommy nodded and stood from his bed as well, deciding to stretch his legs for a moment before he went back to sleep. He watched as Techno disappeared into the trees, his footsteps slowly growing softer and softer as he got further away. Eventually, it was quiet again. Well, I thought he'd never leave.
Oh no.
Tommy froze. He could feel ice in his veins as the voice chilled him to the bone. No, fuck. There's the green bastard himself. Yo, guys,
No.
it's Dream. No way.
Whoa, wait,
No
what?
way, it's Dream.
Dream face reveal.
Okay. He turned and let out a choked sound when his brother stared back at him. His sharp green eyes dark and angry. His green hood was drawn up over his head and his boots were caked in mud.
Dream, Tommy rasped. At that, Dream gave him a bitter smile and pulled the boy into a hug that Tommy didn't reciprocate. He was too tense to even breathe. Hello, little brother. Having fun, are we now? Dream hissed into his ear, and the grip on the back of Wilbur's jacket tightened. He growled at the sight of it. How did you find me? Tommy's voice shook, and Dream pulled back and gently brushed Tommy's bangs out of his eyes. Oh, it was easy, really. I just listened for the sounds of complete and utter betrayal and followed that.
Tommy let out a panicked breath and stammered. Dream, Dream grabbed his wrist tightly and growled. We're going home, Tommy. Right fucking now. Fight. Don't let him scare you. The man began tugging him along, but Tommy resisted and tugged his hand away, stumbling back. Please, Dream, you don't understand. I'm not ready. I've seen so much of the world today than I ever have before. I've learned so much from Will. Tommy bit his tongue.
Ah, yes. The brothers. The ones that half of the kingdom is hunting down like dogs. I'm so proud. Dream sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He tried to grab his arm again, but Tommy completely pulled away, gripping his wrists. His voice was soft as he spoke. Wait, I think they like me. Dream's expression darkened, and he said sharply, Glad to know I'm so easily replaceable. That's not it, and you know it. Tommy shot back, and his brother rolled his eyes. Tommy, how dumb are you? They're playing you! He threw up his hands in exasperation while Tommy's expression faltered.
This is why you never should have left. You're too fucking naive to be here. Tommy's voice came out small as he asked, What do you mean? What do you mean they're playing me? You're a means to an end to them, Tommy. Once they've gotten what they want from you, they'll leave you in the dust. Do you honestly think they're impressed by what you can do? They simply see you as gold, Tommy. A profit at best. Tommy growled. That's not true! They wouldn't do that!
How long have you known them again? A day? No, not even. You don't know them, Tommy. They're dangerous. They saved my life. They didn't have to, but they did. They're good, Tommy argued. Dream grabbed him by his shoulders and shook him gently. You're going to get yourself killed, kid. I'm your brother, not them. I know what's best for you. Now come home. Please, Tommy. No. Tommy hissed and pushed him away. He wasn't going to go back down this. He wasn't going to back down on this. Dream stared at him for a long moment before his expression darkened, and he threw his answer back to him.
No? Fine. I see how it is. Not even 16 years old and so grown up, eh? Since you're so goddamn mature now, and clearly don't need me, go ahead and give them this. With that, Dream reached into his pocket and threw something at him. Tommy just barely caught it, and his voice died in his throat when he saw Theseus's necklace sitting in his palm. He turned his face up in bewilderment and asked, How did you... That's the only fucking thing they're here for, Tommy. They don't give a damn about you. But go ahead. Give it back to them, you'll see. Fine, I will, Tommy snapped, but Dream continued.
The moment they have what they want, they'll leave you. He snapped his fingers and emphasized, just like that. I won't say I told you so. Don't look at me like that. You know best, right? Since you trust them so much, go ahead and put them to the test. Dream, wait! Tommy called out as his brother began to turn to leave. Tommy grabbed his arm. Dream looked at him coldly, and his voice lowered. If they're lying, don't come crying. Brother knows best.
If he's lying, don't come crying.
A brother!
Brother knows best. Whoosh, and then the fog disappears with him. Okay, anyways, I love that song. Let's watch Tangled. Oh wait, it's kind of late.
Okay.
Dream pushed him away and Tommy fell to the ground, the emerald still clutched tightly in his hand. When he turned back to Dream, he was gone. He stared back at the forest and waited for his heart to slow down. Before he could even begin to process what had happened, he heard footsteps. Tommy looked at the necklace and frantically threw it on over his head, tucking the gem inside of his shirt and making sure the chain was covered by his scarf as Wilbur and Techno appeared from the tree line, bickering amongst themselves. Oh my gods, polar bears are not pets, you idiot! They'll maul you to death before you could even get close enough, Wilbur said, sounding exasperated, while Techno merely replied, That's why you don't go after the ones with kids. Those are the ones who will 100% murk you. Now a lone polar bear, on the other hand...
Sake, Tommy, will you please tell Techno how insane... Hey, are you okay? Tommy jolted from his daze and turned to face the twins. He waved off their concern and assured them, Yeah, just spaced out for a moment there. The brunette tried to hide the embarrassed flush in his cheeks as Tommy pulled Wilbur's coat tighter around himself. Tommy gave him an appreciative smile. After a moment, Techno started up again with a shrug. Not insane if you don't get eaten. Oh my god, I wish I was an only child, Wilbur groaned, annoyed.
Tommy couldn't help but laugh. The tension in his Tommy couldn't help but laugh. The tension in his chest easing up a bit. But not much. It was only a few... What?
Sorry,
You're
I had to
gonna-
cry for a second.
Yeah, cry, just give a little cry.
Okay, we're good.
It was
Are you
only...
mocking me?
What?
Are you
No.
mocking me?
No, I would never do that.
Okay, I'll stop cutting you off.
Thank you. Yes, I am papyrus, by the way. Brother, spaghetti!
Oh gosh.
Anyways, it was only a few hours later when Techno was awoken by the feeling of a certain bird poking him with her beak. Ow, what the hell? Techno groaned. Gently batted crow off him, and then looked up at the night sky. Crow, it's like 3 a.m. What? The hybrid growled, and Crow nipped at his collar, tugging him. Techno rolled his eyes and reluctantly sat up and held out his hand for Crow to perch on. He narrowed his eyes at the bird and huffed. All right, I'm up. What is it?
Crow fluttered off his hand and landed on Tommy's shoulder. The boy was curled up in Wilbur's coat, his face scrunched up tightly in his sleep. He was propped up against the fallen tree and his head was resting against it. His hands kept clenching and unclenching around nothing, and every now and then the boy would whimper.
Oh.
There were tears streaming down his face. The kid's got serious nightmares, huh? Techno turned back to look at his twin, confirming he was totally asleep and would never be able to blackmail him for this. The piglin quietly got up and sat by the boy. Tommy jerked in his sleep, his eyes frantically darting around beneath his eyelids. What am I supposed to do about this?
Wake him up?
Hug, 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 hug.
Eee.
Good Techno, bro.
Wake him up. It's a bad dream.
We're rusty at this. I don't know, man.
I agree with whoever said hug. You guys are no fucking help at all. Techno growled to himself and then winced when Chat shouted at him. Fine, I'll wake him up.
Be gentle.
Don't scare him.
E.
Don't be mean.
Bruh. I'm not mean, Techno argued.
You're a little mean.
Blood for the blood god and all that.
Be gentle.
Fine, I'll be nice. Now, hush. With that, Chat settled back into a low hum, and Techno took a deep breath and gently brushed away the hair that was matted to the kid's forehead. Crow perched onto Techno's shoulder, keeping a watchful eye. Tommy. Hey, Tommy. Wake up, kid, Techno said softly. Tommy shook his head in his sleep and grabbed his own wrist, digging his nails tightly into them. Techno quickly grabbed his hands and pried them apart before the kid could hurt himself more. No, 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 go away, the kid mumbled. He tried again, and this time shook his shoulder.
You're having a bad dream, Tommy. Wake up. He did not expect Tommy to shoot up as fast as he did and narrowly avoided bashing heads with him. Techno caught him by the shoulders as the kid looked around frantically at monsters who were no longer there. Hey, kid. You're safe. It was a dream. You were dreaming. Shh. Techno soothed, trying to grab his attention. Eventually, Tommy stopped struggling against his hold, and Techno took a moment to wipe the tears streaming down his splotchy cheeks with a thumb in a gesture he would never admit to.
Techno hushed and let the kid lean forward into his hold a bit as his eyes fluttered shut again. He wasn't exactly awake, but he had woken him from the nightmare. Hopefully, his next dream would be more pleasant. Techno had a suspicion that Tommy probably wouldn't remember this at all in the morning. With that thought, fuck it. Techno opened his arms up more and let the teen slump against his chest. He shifted himself so his back was resting on the fallen tree as well, and Tommy was curled up at his side. He wrapped an arm around the teen and waited for Chat to lose their shit.
Soft.
Soft Techno.
Aww.
I'm gonna cry.
Ah!
Oh, shut up. Techno rolled his eyes and settled into his new position as a pillow. It was only for a little while. He'd wait until the kid was fully asleep and then go back to bed. He wouldn't get sleepy and fall asleep like this. Nope. No way. Sing, bitch.
Sing to him right now.
E.
We know you can, pig boy. No, I will definitely not be doing that. Techno refused, and Chat rattled around in his head. I think my voice will make things worse, actually. His head pounded at Chat's insistent demands and finally yielded when Tommy started twitching again. Gods, what is going on in this kid's head?
What did your brother do to you? Techno took a peek at Wilbur once more, making sure he was truly asleep. Then he turned to Crow and hissed. I don't know how you would snitch, but I still get the feeling that you would. Not a word. Crow cawed cheekily at him, and Techno narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Tommy let out a choked sound, and Techno frowned, and gently rubbed circles into his shoulder as he lowly sang to the stars.
He knew his voice wasn't the best. Definitely not as good as his twins, but hopefully it would be enough to chase away Tommy's monsters. At least for a little while. This is Bedrock Bros.
Wait, that's it?
Yeah, that's it. Anyways, end of chapter 17.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, what are you gonna do about it?
Cry?
Okay. I want to see where the song leads me. Oh. Little Prince trailer song? Yo. Pog. I'm gonna turn my camera back on. Chat, how are we doing?
Not good.
You're fine.